Hare Krishna. Thank you very much for joining us on this Bhagavad Gita Level 2 course, where we will be discussing the glories of Maharaj Bharat. And I promise you, you will find this a very interesting pastime, a very interesting story from the Srimad Bhagavatam. And it gives us so many lessons that we can take from the Bhagavad Gita and also add to our little tool belt of lessons, our tool belt of understanding, so that we can progress in our spiritual life. So before we begin, I always like to offer my obeisances unto my beloved Gurudev, Nitya Vishnu Vishnupad, Paramhamsa Parivrajgacharya Stotra Shishimad Bhaktivedanta Narayan Goswami Maharaj, and also Nitya Vishnu Vishnupad Stotra Shishimad Bhaktivedanta Swami Maharaj, and all the Rupanuga Gaudiya Guru Varga. Then I'd like to offer my obeisances unto all of you, the Vaishnavas who are present here, who are watching today, or maybe watching in the future. And I pray that whatever we discuss today, may it be an inspiration and may it be a addition to your tool belt in your spiritual life. So Maharaj Bharat being a very famous person, right? Very famous person in the history of India is discussed in the Srimad Bhagavatam. But before we talk about Maharaj Bharat, let's talk about his father, who is known as Maharaj Rishabdev. Now, Maharaj Rishabdev is, uh, you can split his name in two different parts. First is Rishab, which means the best, and then Dev, which means one who has a divine person. So Maharaj Rishabdev was actually an expansion or an avatar of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, right? He's one of the avatars who came to bestow and to demonstrate how to become an ideal king. And just like his father, King Nabi, was also a very ideal and perfect king. Entire kingdom was very prosperous during these times. And Maharaj Rishabdev and his father, King Nabi, were so powerful, so influential, so strong, and so illustrious that they controlled the entire world, not just one part of a kingdom. And not only that, but more importantly, they were great kings because they were loved by their praja, by their citizens, right? And why were they loved? Because not only should a king be powerful, strong, and influential, but he should also be affectionate and caring and have a soft heart for the needs of his citizens. And so Maharaj Rishabdev and Maharaj and King Nabi also demonstrated this. Now, Maharaj Rishabdev, some facts. His wife was named Maharani Jayanti, and he had 100 sons. 100 sons, nine of which were considered very prominent. You can see here Maharaj Rishabdev on the throne instructing his nine sons on how to be good kings and how to attain the perfection of life. And his eldest son, amongst all his 100 sons, was known as Bharat. And that's who we will be focusing on today. Now, Maharaj Rishabdev, being the Supreme Lord, being an incarnation or an avatar of the Supreme Lord, always instructed his sons and his citizens the path of perfection. And he always wanted that they should follow the path of pure bhakti yoga and spiritual realization. Now, when it was time for him to retire, Maharaj Rishabdev gave the kingdom to his eldest, most qualified son, Maharaj Bharat. And Maharaj Bharat was so glorious that even today his name is considered very important. For those of you who know that India, right, is often called as Bharat. Bharat. Well, where does that name come from? Because Bharat means the kingdom originally from King Bharat. So King Bharat, actually, remember in history, the continents were all one, Pangaea, right? And Maharaj Bharat ruled the entire earth, and therefore it was known as Bharatvarsh. Of course, as time progressed and countries separated, then Bharatvarsh is known now as India, which is still considered the origin of Maharaj Bharat's kingdom. And there were some teachings that Maharaj Rishabdev gave, and some of these might sound familiar. That human life is extremely precious. Well, we know that human life is very rare because there are 8.4 million species of life as described in the scriptures. And humans are the only life where we can achieve spiritual realization, the only species with which we can achieve this because we have the highest consciousness. So if one is a dog or a hog or a plant or a fish, a bird or a demigod, they may not be able to achieve that higher state of consciousness, that self-realization. But in the human birth, we can do so. So don't waste it. And by engaging in devotional service or bhakti, right, then one can achieve that highest goal. And to become enthusiastic, one should associate with great devotees known as Mahatmas. By associating with devotees, then we too get that inspiration. We too get their qualities within their heart. And then one should accept a highly elevated guru. Now, a guru is described as having some qualities that are very important. What is a guru? One who is always engaged in the service of the Lord Sri Krishna, one who can clear all one's doubts, right? One who can provide evidence from the scriptures to clear their doubts, not just simply concocting something from their own mind, right? One who is very learned, who has studied the scriptures, one who is a true servant can become a true master. What does that mean? That a pure guru is a perfect, ideal servant to their guru, right? Only by serving their guru can they become qualified to become a guru, and that one should respect all living entities. Because just like Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, that each living entity in this world has a soul, and that one should not take advantage of their body, or one should not disrespect them because each soul is equal to me, right? So one should respect all living entities. And finally, Maharaj Rishabdev says, Guru nashashyat swajano nashashyat. Pita nashashyat janani nashashyat. Devam natatsyan napatish chashasyan namachayad ya samupeta mrityum. That one who cannot deliver his dependents from the path of repeated birth and death should never become a spiritual master, a father, a husband, a mother, or a worshipable demigod. So, what does this mean? That means that if you want to become a father, a husband, a mother, a guru, right? Or anything, or even a demigod, that what is the duty of these persons? To deliver those that are dependent on them. What does it mean by deliver them? Deliver them, relieve them from the path of repeated birth and death. That means one who is a father, a mother, a husband, or any of these should tell the son, child, daughter, whatever it is, wife, or husband, if you're a wife, then one should tell them to practice spiritual consciousness. One should give them the opportunity to practice spiritual consciousness. Otherwise, they are not a responsible person. So, one of the responsibilities that one should take when one takes care of someone is that not only should they nourish their body, but they should also nourish their soul. So, Maharaj Bharat, now being the son of Rishadev, finally gets the kingdom from his father after he retires and goes to the forest. Then Maharaj Bharat engages in so many beautiful pastimes, and he's such a pious and admirable king. He followed all the instructions and principles of his father that we just discussed, and he ruled the earth just like his father did. And because of that, the earth was very prosperous. That grains were very prevalent, grains were very prevalent. Like they came very easily because the earth was satisfied. Rains would come and sacrifices were made, right? And all the citizens were happy. And because he performed these Vedic sacrifices, he always remembered Krishna constantly. He always remembered the lotus feet of the Lord. And he married and had 5 sons. And this world prior to his reign was known as Ajanab, right? And but after he became king, then it became known as Bharatvarsh, which is still used today. So Maharaj Bharat, after ruling the kingdom for such a long time, knowing that the true goal of one's life is to attain self-realization, to follow the path of pure bhakti yoga, he then retires from the kingdom, leaves his kingdom to his sons, and then goes to the forest. He goes to the forest with one pointed dedication, and he goes to a place called the Pulaha Ashram, which is on the banks of the Gandaki River. And throughout the day and night, he increased his devotional practice every single day. He would learn to, he engaged in meditation, he engaged in chanting of the name, in service of the Lord through the deities of the Shaligram. He always served and continuously increased his devotion and remembrance of the Lord. And he gave up his attachment to any material enjoyment because he knew that this material enjoyment would not give him eternal happiness. And his devotion increased so much. He was practicing for days and weeks and months and years. It increased so much that he even gave up some of his regulative service. What does that mean? He gave up some of his Vedi bhakti because there are two types of bhakti. Pay attention, this is very difficult to understand sometimes. There are two aspects of bhakti. One is called Vedi bhakti and one is called Raganuga bhakti, or regulative bhakti and spontaneous bhakti. Now, for example, let me give a very simple example, right? That one who is in the path of Vedi bhakti, he may say, oh, I must wake up at this time. I must shower at this time. I must do my puja at this time. I must offer this at this time. I must follow the rules and regulations of the scriptures because it is the right thing to do. And I follow the path of regulation. I follow this path. But one who is on a higher level, whose heart and mind and consciousness are absorbed in Krishna completely, then he sometimes reaches the stage of Raganuga Bhakti. For example, the residents of Vrindavan, do they wake up at a specific time and serve Krishna at a specific time? Excuse me. Yes, they do. But more so than that, they're doing services for Krishna because they have spontaneous love and attraction for him, right? Just like if every day I wake up in the morning and at 8 a.m. I go to my mother and I touch her feet and I say, Mother, I love you, that is one thing. But if every single day, because I love my mother so much and I feel my heart filled with love for her, then I go and do this, I go and do that because of my love for her, not because at 8 a.m. fixed I should be touching her feet. Then this is known as Raga Nuga Bhakti, which is a very high advanced stage that the residents of Vrindavan are following. The gopis, the gopas, the friends of Krishna, the mother and father of Krishna, they have overwhelming love in their heart that clouds this sort of regulative nature. They don't just follow the scriptures and follow regulation for the sake of it because it's the right thing to do. They do it because they love him. They do it because they want to serve him so that it fulfills their heart's desire. So Maharaj Bharat also did this. He gave up some of his regulative practice and he ultimately felt that transcendental bliss that comes from following this path of bhakti yoga. Now, as he is doing this, one fine day, something very interesting happens. So he's in the forest meditating, very silently meditating, but one of his eyes opens up and he sees a beautiful deer crossing the river. He sees a beautiful deer crossing the river, and that deer is pregnant. It's a female deer, right? She's pregnant with a baby just about to give birth. Now, this deer gets separated from her herd because all deers travel in herd. But somehow this deer has gotten separated from her herd. And she approaches this Gandaki river, the river that Maharaj Bharat is at. And she's just drinking the water because she's so thirsty. And what happens? Maharaj Bharat, with his eye half open, sees that there's a loud sound coming from the earth, from the forest. Roar! Right? And what is that sound? The sound of a tiger. And Maharaj Bharat sees from the corner of his eye that this deer, this mother deer, this pregnant deer, becomes extremely fearful upon hearing that sound. So, though she cannot see where this tiger is, she knows that he is nearby and is out to get her. And so, what does the deer do? Because of her fear, she mistakenly, out of fear, jumps in the river and crashes into a rock. And as she's jumping in the river, she gives birth to her child because out of fear, she gives birth to the child deer, to the baby deer, and then crashes in the river on rocks and unfortunately dies. Now, this baby deer is struggling in the river all alone. Mother dies. And Maharaj Bharat sees this from his eye. And he says, oh my goodness, I must rescue this baby deer and I must provide it shelter because now its mother is lost. And Maharaj Bharat picks up the deer and takes it to the place where he meditates. Now, Maharaj Bharat slowly and gradually becomes very attached to this deer. He thinks of it as he is the mother and father of this deer. Because the deer is alone, he believes it is his responsibility to take care of the deer. That the Lord has given this deer to him for his responsibility. And because he was a king, then he felt the moral duty or obligation to take care of the deer, just like one of his citizens of his kingdom. So as his life progresses, he begins to become more and more attached to this deer. So much to the point that he even sometimes forgets to do his meditation, forgets to do his bhakti, forgets to engage in that devotional service because the deer is bouncing around. So when the deer goes a little bit further, he says, oh, let me go, bring you back. So take it out of danger. Or when the deer is hungry, he'll go and collect the leaves and grasses to feed it. Or when the deer is thirsty, he'll take it to the river, etc., etc. He builds a shelter for the deer. He takes care of the deer like one of his own. And gradually, Maharaj Bharat then becomes fully attached to the deer, right? And he forgets his devotional practice completely. And sometimes it is stated in the Srimad Bhagavatam that he remembers that, oh, I left my kingdom for one pointedness to get in the path of bhakti, to get in the path of service to the Lord. But I have forgotten that. And I should be doing that. No? And then he says, no, 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 wait. It is my correct duty to instead take care of this deer. And so he is mistaken in this. He's mistaken because the Srimad Bhagavatam states that philanthropy has nothing to do with the body. We've learned this in the Bhagavad Gita also, that one should not try to help one's body, one should try to help one's soul. That true philanthropy is helping the soul, and it is impossible to improve another's material condition because they too will get the result of their karma, right? They will get the result of their karma no matter what effort you might make. So any effort you make is just temporary. Instead, one should try to raise the spiritual consciousness of another. And by doing so, you are truly uplifting them from the cycle of birth and death. And that material happiness and distress, whether that be for a deer, for an animal, or for another human, comes without effort, right? Matra sparsastu kontaya shitoshna shukadukada agamapaino nityastamtik Bharata. That Arjun, Krishna says, Arjun, one should remain tolerant of both happiness and distress because they come like the seasons of nature, like the winter and summer seasons, or like the waves of the ocean, which one has no control. And that if you become attached to these material relationships, to this material body, then ultimately it is binding. So Maharaj Bharat, he forgets his ultimate goal, the reason why he gave up the kingdom. He gave up the attachment to his citizens. He gave up the attachment to his sons. He gave up the attachment to his kingdom to follow the path of bhakti yoga, to follow the path of spirituality. Yet, somehow, even though he was gradually progressing, because of this attachment to a deer, he falls down. He falls down and he becomes mad after the deer. So one day when the deer grows up, just like a wild animal does, he ran away from Maharaj Bharat, right? This deer ran away from Maharaj Bharat, and Maharaj Bharat became extremely depressed. He became extremely depressed and he began saying such silly things, feeling separation from the deer, saying, oh, my dear, now he is helpless. He does not have me to take care of him. And because of that, I am most unfortunate that he sees the deer footprints and tries to follow them, but eventually loses track and is not able to recover the deer. And he says, upon seeing those footprints, that the earth is more fortunate than me because the earth, Mother Earth, knows where the deer is, but I don't. And he became like a madman. He started looking at the moon, and the little marks on the moon reminded him of his deer. And he began feeling great separation in his heart, like a fire burning within his heart. And finally, when the time of death came, he completely was absorbed in the deer. So Maharaj Bharat, though he had the highest goal in mind, because he was in the forest alone, he got stuck and attached to the deer. So this seems like such a silly story, one that could never happen to us. Would we become attached to a deer? No, I'm too above that, right? But what happens In our life, we do the same thing. That even though we want to achieve the path of spiritual realization, the path of the topmost, highest bhakti, we get distracted by these little objects. Now, it may seem silly, like a deer. A deer seems silly, but isn't it the same thing when we become attached to so many material things? They may not be a deer, but they're also silly in their own regard, especially in comparison to that topmost goal. So, what is Maharaj Bharat teaching? What is Maharaj Bharat teaching, and what is our Acharyas teaching? That they say that because Maharaj Bharat, he went to do the right thing, he went to accomplish the highest goal, but he tried to do it alone. He tried to do it alone. He went to the forest alone without the association of the devotees, without remaining under the guidance of other higher elevated devotees. Then this is the reason why he fell. And it is also described in the Srimad Bhagavatam that due to his previous karma, that means he made one mistake in the past due to committing some offense to a devotee. Then that offense came in the form of this deer and brought him down so that he did not achieve perfection in that life. So one cannot go to the forest. It is not recommended in this age of Kali to simply go to the forest or the corner of your room, the corner of your house, and try to meditate on the Supreme Lord. One cannot do it alone. One must be under the guidance of Guru. One must be under the guidance of the devotees. Because if Maharaj Bharat remained under the guidance of devotees and went to the forest and stayed with the sages, stayed with the devotees, then they would have warned him that, oh, Maharaj Bharat, you came for this highest goal, but you became attached to a deer. You should give this up because you are not the caretaker of the deer. The Supreme Lord is the caretaker of the deer. And if you worship him, he takes care of everything in the universe. And just like Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, Sarva Dharman Parityaja Mam Ekam Sharanam Vraja, that give up all varieties of activities, give up all varieties of what you perceive as the correct duty, the correct dharma, the correct religion, and just Mam Ekam Sharanam Vraja, surrender unto me. And in this way, I will relieve you from all sinful reaction, right? That you should not fear. This is Krishna's promise in chapter 18 of the Bhagavad Gita. So Maharaj Bharat would have been guided properly if he would have been under the association of the devotees. So many people think when they will retire, they will give up everything and go to the forest or go to the holy places and then perform bhajan. But no, don't just do that. That is very good. That is very pious. But start now, like we learned in Prahlad Maharaj. Start now and have the highest goal, like we learned with Dhruv Maharaj. But also maintain the association and guidance of a guru throughout your life. By doing so, you will not be succumbed and fall into this condition. Now, Krishna also promises one more thing in the Bhagavad Gita. He says that anything you do, any progress you make on this path of spiritual life will never go to waste. And wherever you ended, you will start again in your next life. And he also says that whatever you remember at the time of death, that is what you will be in your next life. So Maharaj Bharat in his next life was born as a deer, but he remained, he was very fortunate to have the memory of his previous life. He remembered everything that had happened when he was king and what happened in the forest. And so as a deer, he did not make the same mistake again. And as a deer, it is said by our acharyas that he attained vastu siddhi. He attained perfection because as a deer, what did he do? He immediately, upon growing up, left his family and went to that same Pulaha ashram, went to that same Pulaha ashram and stayed on the river. But instead of staying alone in that river, right? Instead of staying alone on that river, he stayed near the ashram of sages. And constantly, he was always listening to the lectures, the katha, the hari katha of those sages. He was seeing their practices and penances, and he was meditating on the Supreme Lord while also maintaining the association of the sages. So by doing this process, Maharaj Bharat actually achieves vastu siddhi or perfection in this body of a deer because he remembered his previous life and did not make a mistake. So, upon finally achieving this, and upon the death of this body, then Maharaj Bharat goes to his next life as Jada Bharat. And he appears as Jada Bharat, the son of a very great Brahmin family, right? And but he behaves very interestingly. What does he do? We'll get to this in a second. So Maharaj Bharat behaves in a very interesting manner because he remembers both of his previous lifetimes. So immediately he begins acting silly. He begins acting dumb so that others would not sit there and give him respect and honor. He had no desire for honor. He had no desire to have material relationships. So instead of following everything that his father and his family would say, he simply would act dumb. And gradually, as the Srimad Bhagavatam states, that people began to reject him from society. They rejected him from society so much that they tried to give him some even menial jobs, but but he did not execute them properly. So one day, his brothers, after his parents had passed and he was under the authority of his brothers, they put him in the fields of their farms like a scarecrow. You know, like a scarecrow is put in the field, and they're simply just standing there to avoid any attacks on the field from birds or pigeons or anything like that, which eat the crops. So Jada Bharat was put into the field and worked in the fields at night. Now, one day, the king of that region was looking for a person to sacrifice for Kali Devi, for Kali Ma, for his sacrifice for her puja. And he had sent his people, his dacoits, to go and look for someone that is so dumb, that is so silly, he's like an animal, right? And they saw that Jada Bharat was sitting there in the fields behaving like a scarecrow. So they thought, wow, this boy, this man who has such a strong body, who's a big hatafata, big strong guy, that we should use him for the sacrifice to Kali. So the dacoits, they take him to the temple, and in front of the deity of Kali, they put him on the sacrificial altar. And right before they are about to chop his head off to sacrifice him, then what happens? The deity of Kali bursts open, and Kali Devi comes out and says, "How dare you? How dare you attack the devotee of the Supreme Lord? That you are all dacoits, and I do not accept this sacrifice." And she begins to kill all of the dacoits for the bad activity that they did, for offending the devotee of the Lord. So, what does this tell us? That the devotees are always protected and unagitated in whatever condition they are put in. That Jada Bharat never complained when he was being taken away because his mind was always engaged in the Supreme Lord. And this Kali Devi, who is the sister of Krishna, Durga Devi is the sister of Krishna. She's the uh, servant of Krishna, actually, because as the Supreme Lord, she is his Shakti. She is one of his energies. She is the Maya Devi. She is the potency of Maya. That Kali Devi would never tolerate the killing or the sacrifice of a devotee of the Supreme Lord. And instead, she kills actually her own devotees because she wants to teach them a lesson. Now, after this incident, Jadabharat leaves and begins roaming around in the forest. And one day, the king of that region, Maharaj Rahugana, is traveling on a palanquin. So, just like a king is traveling on the palanquin, and there are four different people on the palanquin that carries the king. One day, they are passing through this forest, and one of the members of the palanquin gets injured and is unable to carry the palanquin. So the other three began looking at who in this forest can help us carry this palanquin so the king can get to this destination. And where's the king going? Where's Maharaj Rahugana going? He's going to the ashram or to the place of hermitage of Kapil Muni, right? Kapil Dev, for spiritual instruction. So he's going on a very pious mission. He's going to elevate himself, right? And because of this, the three members of the palanquin, they're searching for someone to help them, and they encounter Jada Bharat in the forest. And he's roaming around in the forest. And because he's such a strong bodied, tall person, they say, ah, this person is excellent for carrying the palanquin. Now, Jada Bharat, again, being a pure devotee, unagitated by whatever situation is presented to him by the Supreme Lord, says, okay, I will carry the palanquin. And he begins carrying the palanquin, but he does so in an interesting manner. Now, Jada Bharat, as you can see in this picture, begins walking in a very funny way, sometimes here, sometimes there, and always watching down and sometimes going like this. Now, why is he jumping from here and there? Sometimes stopping, sometimes moving fast, sometimes skipping backwards, moving forwards, etc. Why is he doing this? Because he is such a pure devotee. He has such a compassionate heart that he is looking that, oh, I should avoid the stepping on any ants. I should not harm any living entity that crosses my path, because who am I and who are they? They are also souls of this world and they are equal, right? That I should not simply for my own pleasure just walk and kill all these ants in my way. So in this way, Jada Bharat is very carefully maneuvering. But what happens? Because he is one leg of the palanquin, as he's moving back and forth, the king begins rocking within his palanquin and gets very upset. He gets very upset and says, hey, what is happening here? Why is my palanquin shaking left and right? And why am I about to fall off? Right? You can see here the king. And he becomes upset at those. And he gets upset and he tells that who is doing this? What is the cause of this? And the other three members who are carrying the palanquin, the other three soldiers, they say it is because of this Jada Bharat that this is happening. So you please tell him. And Maharaj Raghugana says, hey, don't you know how to carry a palanquin? Don't you know who I am king? And he begins criticizing sarcastically that you look so strong, but actually, have you no strength in your body? That actually, even though you are so bold and you have such a tall body, that you are like a weak-bodied person. And he begins making fun of him, thinking that if I make fun of him, then he will behave properly and carry me, because I am the king and you are my servant. So the king becomes gradually angry because Jada Bharat maintains his posture of walking in this unusual way. And then ultimately, the king gets angry. When he gets angry, he criticizes him very harshly, and Jada Bharat then opens his mouth. And he says many different instructions to Maharaj Rahugana. And he says that, oh, who is king and who is the servant? That in this life you are king, and I may appear as your servant, but in a previous life I may have been king, and you may have been my servant. And the king becomes surprised that who speaks like this? And he says that, yes, though I am not this body, I am the soul, I may have a weak body, like you mentioned, right? I may have a weak body, like you mentioned, but that does not mean that that is who I really am. That is who I really am. I am not this body, I am the soul. And you are not a king, you are the soul inside. And he's teaching him various instructions, just like his father taught him, and just like he learned from his practices in the forest. And so Jada Bharat goes on and on and on. And finally, the king surrenders and gets off his palanquin and says, you are not an ordinary person. Who are you? Are you some kind of great rishi? Are you some kind of great sage? Are you a great demigod? Or are you Kapil himself, Kapil Muni himself, that has come to me to teach me a lesson? Who are you? And please accept my obeisances unto your lotus feet. That please instruct me. And then finally, Jada Bharat says, I am Jada Bharat. But in my previous lifetime, I am one of your original lineage members. I came before you as Maharaj Bharat and ruled the entire world. So don't get an ego, Maharaj Rahugana, because today you may be king, but later on you may be a simple person. So do not have this ego of being a king. And he gives various instructions to Maharaj Rahugana. And Maharaj Rahugana then begins to offer his obeisances and then proceeds to Kapil Muni's ashram, where he achieves more spiritual instruction. And Jada Bharat becomes merciful uh, to his grandson, to his great grandson Maharaj Rahugana, because he is going for spiritual instruction. So to recap, Maharaj Bharat as the emperor of the world, he's a great devotee, renounces everything, but unfortunately becomes attached to a deer because he does not remain under the guidance of a guru or the devotees. But because of his fortune and his practice, he remembers his previous life and spends life in the ashram, repenting and praying, and remaining free of any offense or aparad to a devotee. And then finally, as Jada Bharat, he has memory of his past two lives. He acts like a fool so that others do not respect him and he does not get caught up in this material world. And he instructs the whole world through Maharaja Rahugana. So, what do we learn from this story? That association is key, that remaining under the guidance is key, that one should not have an ego, one should not be forgetful and think that they can achieve this goal on their own, that one should always remain under guidance and association. So some of the teachings that remind us that this reminds us of in the Bhagavad Gita is that dhyato vishaya punsha shangaste shubhajayate sangat sanjayate kama kama krodh abhijayate. That because Maharaj Bharat was always attached to the deer, that ultimately this led to his downfall. And what else? Antakale chamam eva smarana muktva kalevaram. Ya prayati sad madbhavam yati nastya atra samshaya. That whatever you remember at the time of death, whatever you do at this end of your life is what you will achieve at the end of in your next birth. So one should practice throughout one's life, just like the example of Prahlad and Dhruv, that one should practice throughout one's life because at the time of death, you will remember everything that has happened in the past, everything that you have done throughout your life. And it's not just simply remembering Krishna at the last moment of your life. You cannot do that if you haven't practiced your entire life. And then, of course, Neha Bikramanashasti, we've talked about this, that there is no loss or diminution in this path of bhakti. There's no loss or diminution, that wherever you end, you will start again in your next life. So with that, we'd like to conclude this story of Maharaj Bharat. Hare Krishna. Vanchakalpatarubhyascha, kripa sindhubhyascha, patitanam pavanebhyo.